2. We made it to episode 2. Happy to be here. Have you guys ever noticed how sometimes a simple game can make you feel so much? Slowly, it becomes less about winning and more about how you react when you're losing.
Or what you say when you're winning and what that says about your character.
These are the questions we have for you today on the NF3 Podcast.
One move at a time.
So, here we go.
Oh, that's real good.
Well, welcome back, everybody. This is episode 2 of the NF3 Podcast. Like I said, I'm Sean, and this is Hunter.
Hey, guys.
As every good podcast, we have to start with a strong opening move and, of course, strong opening questions for one another.
If you haven't seen episode 1, we are two strangers getting to know each other in front of a camera for the world to see.
With similar yet different perspectives on our lives and the knowledge we hope to share.
Ego plays a big part in every decision you make, whether it's a good decision or a bad one. But that's what makes it the most intense aspect of people's lives.
And previously, we learned, what it means to grow as a person and to not hold on to your past. And speaking of the past, how have you been since we filmed our last episode? It's been about a week.
Yeah, I feel pretty good. I gotta say, that first episode, that was pretty interesting. Especially having you as a partner now. I see us going pretty far together in our professional careers.
I know, and it's kind of like we did the first episode. That was a great way to break the ice, and the people don't always get to see what we're doing, but we hang out also after the fact as well. And
Absolutely.
Last time we got tacos. Tell them about those.
Guys, if you are ever in Oceanside, California, go to Sancho's Tacos in downtown Oceanside. You will not be disappointed. What kind of tacos did you get, Sean?
I had actually the best tacos I've ever had in my life. I had the surf and turf, and it was steak and shrimp, and man, it's been in San Diego for 7 years, and that's probably the best I've had in the area. So very impressed.
It's pretty crazy. I recommend the OG tacos or the surf and turf. Those are the best. But what did you notice about opening yourself up to someone new after hanging out outside the podcast and not talking business?
I think it was really interesting because it was kind of it's a weird balance between we do business, we make the podcast, but then, it's a good opportunity to kind of let your guard down, to breathe a little, kind of untalk your office shirt. I think it's kind of akin to if you were, working in an office and you went out with drinks with your boss or your coworker after, and you guys both kind of get to undo the tuxedo a little bit. You get comfortable, and that's exactly how it felt. It was really fun. It was really engaging, and despite not really knowing each other too much, I felt like it was a really good opportunity to get to know each other.
I agree with that. And the most interesting part I will say about us two is technically we met just a little over a month ago, and we've only seen each other 3 times in person, as well as talked over the phone countless times about the podcast. And it's actually very refreshing after these episodes or before we film an episode that we go out and just have a down-to-earth conversation and get to know each other a little bit better. The vibes are checking.
Yeah, I think it's really important that, the time we spend outside the podcast is still enriching and fun. And it's just important as, what we do when we're doing business and we're working is, we also have to balance that with our personal side of things and, having fun. That's the whole point.
Absolutely. And it's been quite an experience. What would you say was one thing in episode 1 that really connected with you?
I think honestly, sharing my story and kind of some of the emotional things that I was feeling during that first episode were really genuine and really connected with me. And, I feel like after the first episode, I've realized that especially with this first season, there's going to be a lot of introspectiveness that comes from these episodes and a lot of reflection. And, not just from myself, but also, my family. Some of my family members are probably going to see that episode, and they're going to maybe hear things from me that they might not have, expected, or maybe they didn't hear it from my perspective before. And I think, it's a lot of reflection for myself, but also for, the people who know me. And it's good. I think reflection is positive.
It'll be interesting to see how everybody reacts to that. We've had a little bit of a hiccup with it, but other than that, I think so far the production side of that episode's been going well. I kind of agree with you on that sharing a personal piece of your story, it's very personal, and it takes a lot of bravery to put something like that on the internet, especially when you don't know how people are going to react. I mean, people on the internet, they can be real dicks, or they can be really, really empathetic, and that's very brave to share that part of your life.
And I kind of see it as like, I guess, another form of just, self-expression. And
Yeah.
I think some people are going to see my story and they're going to see it for what it is, which is just a testament, right? Like, I've overcome certain trials and certain obstacles, and I'm standing here today as a testament to let people who are going through a similar thing know that, they can also, stand up and progress their life forward. I don't want anybody who heard my story to feel like, if they're in the same place that they're stuck, because, there's always a path forward. But I think some people are going to hear it, they're going to have their own opinions. They might, even find something in what I said to be kind of maybe even, should I dare say, like jealous or like envy from it. I think sometimes, people also can have emotions that are negative from hearing people's story. I had someone, one time, I can't remember what the context was, but I think I had shared something about myself in a comment thread. It was on someone's like Instagram post. And I just remember, like, out of nowhere, someone was just like, who cares?
Damn.
You know what I mean? And like you said, people online are ruthless. And I think the internet is a really strange place. You see competition everywhere and you see people kind of on edge everywhere. But one of the places I expected at least would be chess.com. I was actually playing a game on chess.com, and I had someone completely flip out in the middle of the game and start cursing me out through text. So
on chess.com.
On chess.com, you never really know where you're going to find the crazies. But I think part of being comfortable on the internet is just knowing that there's going to be people who are going to hear your story. They're going to connect with it. And that's your tribe, like we're building our tribe. We're finding the people who genuinely are moved by, our experiences and want to know more.
Amen to that, brother.
Amen to that. So getting into the theme of the episode and really kind of digging into some of the emotional side of things, I want to talk about competition. We've touched about it a little bit, but I really want to get into like some of the things that you've done throughout the like earlier side of your life. Like, were you ever in any sports? Like, what's your history with competition?
I have a very long laundry list of competitions that I've participated in throughout my life. One of the most notable ones, I would say, would be when I was a content creator about 10 years ago. I remember when YouTube was still kind of on the upbringing. It wasn't as big as it was during COVID to now. So it was kind of a fun place to go and just experiment. Mm-hmm. And a lot of the videos were very unserious and had a low budget. It was very personal back in the day. So I started when I was about 13 years old. So I was a preteen, or to some a teenager. And what's interesting about my old channel was I had no idea what I was going to post. I basically sampled a bunch of different flavors for my channel, tried different things, and
as most people do.
Yeah. See what hit. I mean, I did gaming, I did IRL, I did tutorials. So I was kind of all over the board. And I actually accumulated some substantial views, I'd say, for my age. I got over about 5 million views in my first year. And then I got over 1,000 subscribers in my first year. And that actually landed me with a really crispy contract from a company called TGN, if you know who that is. Which, now thinking about it, I think it's pretty weird that they were reaching out to me because I was such a small channel. But they wanted to monetize me because I had some videos that blew up, and I was very proud of them. I was very proud that I could potentially make myself into something on the internet. I've always kind of thought that was a cool concept, even when I was a kid. I like the idea of the creative freedom. But I grew a lot from that experience in the sense of I always thought that just posting simple content was good enough. And, as I progressed through it, I kind of learned that that's not the way to entertain people. You have to be more personal and not be a robot and try to get a connection with your audience. But I had 3 friends that I met over the internet when I was a kid who each one of them had a YouTube channel. And we were all competing to get subscribers, as you do when you're 13 to 14 years old trying to figure stuff out in your life. And you're like, okay, well, we're all on the internet. We all have YouTube channels. Let's see who
want
can...
some internet clout.
Yep, pretty much. Internet clout in middle school, all the above. So I was always like very competitive with one of my buddies. His old YouTube channel was called Struck, like lightning, like struck.
Oh.
And he made similar content to me. I met him off the internet. Like I said, I think the first time I met him was actually off a YouTube comment left on one of my videos. And he happened to know another one of my friends. So it was really weird because he lived halfway across the country. So really cool small world. But as I progressed, I started to become like really competitive and jealous with this guy. And more than a 13-year-old should be. Like, I was competing for editing style. I was competing for content. I was competing for everything. And that's kind of the weird part about it is I have no idea why I was competing that hard. And what I kind of chalked it up to after it was all said and done was I was looking for something to grab so I could have control over something. Especially if you guys listen to the last episode, you kind of know my history, and that's kind of around the time my mom got sick. So I was trying to distract myself essentially. And that's what, I guess, my first instance of developing an ego. Like, I thought, okay, I'm better than these people because I can do this. And what I learned from that is, like, no matter how big of a person you think you are, you're probably a little bit smaller than you think. And there's always room to grow.
Yeah, I guess it kind of goes back to that old expression, it's like there's always like a bigger fish in the sea, so to speak. Like, I even think about it, my own personal things. And it's like I get really good at something, and I still find it important to remind myself and kind of bring some of that, humility back in, that it could be someone better than me, like even, for example, the world's best chess player, I look at Magnus and I'm like, man, what if there's like some like 12-year-old out there who could beat him and they're just like waiting to come out, you know what I mean?
There was actually a guy 2 years ago who was a bit younger, maybe not as young as 12. I think he was like 18 or 20 that actually beat Magnus Carlsen in the championships, which was pretty crazy because he's like undefeated. So,
and I say, like, imagine the size of your ego if you're Magnus and then you lose to someone who's younger, maybe a little bit more unexperienced. Like, I can definitely understand why that would bring out maybe some more negative emotions. And I think competition can be a positive thing for sure. Like, even kind of going back to your story, you're competing with your friend. I'm sure at some point, you felt like, even though there was maybe some competition and some ego, you guys were kind of driving each other to be better.
Yeah. I guess that's a great way to look at it because, I've always had the perspective of I was trying to demolish. Like, I was out there to destroy and conquer. And, for a preteen, that's like...
A little aggressive.
Yeah, that's aggressive, and that's kind of the mentality. What was kind of a time where you were pretty competitive and you learned to grow from it?
I think for me, similar to you, competition was always kind of in the spirit of who I was. And for me, it's, I guess, really more important to like consider why I'm competing and what I'm competing for. And, You guys heard a little bit about my background as well. So, I come from foster care, and foster care is a tough environment. And when you're, young and life is hard, sometimes just surviving, finding the strength to go to school and stay on a good track can feel like you're competing. I
Yeah.
definitely felt like I was sometimes competing just, life wise with the kids around me, especially the kids who were rewarded for being like, the good kids. I was kind of sat in the corner and they gave me my own little like independent desk. But, thinking about it a little bit older and a little bit wiser, I definitely realized, like you're only in competition with someone in like your mind. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
you could sometimes create competition in your head. And sometimes you have to kind of be willing to do a little bit of a pause, a little bit of an evaluation, and ask yourself, like, am I actually competing? Or like, am I competing with someone or am I competing with myself? You know what I mean? Is it in my head? Am I the one who's making a competition out of things? And I feel like a lot of the times I was, I had to take a lot of time to understand that people are just like me. They're complex. They have feelings and emotions. And, ego definitely played a role in it for me as well as a kid, thinking, like I was on top of the world and kind of just feeling alone and, feeling like I was the only person who was going to take care of me. But I had, a lot of great figures in my life to help curb a lot of that. And, I also had karma, just basic universal karma. The amount of times where I've had an ego about something and ended up losing it or, falling flat on my ass is more times than I can count on my hands for sure. But I definitely think that's a little bit about, just my background with competition. I'm curious, like, to know, like, in your sense when you were competing with your friend, like, was there ever a point where you felt like the competition got out of control?
Absolutely. I'd say pretty much any time we would reach a sub goal,
Mm.
it got so bad to a point where I couldn't be in a Discord or a Skype at the time, if any of you remember Skype, with him, because it got ultra competitive, and it was toxic competitive because we all had stuff going on in our lives. We all knew each other, but it slowly became toxic. It's like who had the best editing software, who had the best equipment, who had the most subs, who has the best thumbnails, just all the little stuff you wouldn't on a day-to-day basis think about when you're watching YouTube. So it got to a point where we wouldn't talk for weeks or months, and then we'd apologize, go back to it, and then so on and so forth.
Competition has a way of exposing like your emotions like that. It really does allow you to kind of get a feel and a sense for like, how you feel about something and just for all the positive things that, competition can do. It can allow you to grow, but it can also, bring out a lot of ugliness.
Yeah.
And I feel like, if you're someone who hasn't tasted the sting of, defeat in competition, you can kind of build up that ego. That ego can kind of sometimes get out of control. And maybe in your sense, if you felt like, especially with your friend, that you were kind of always on top, you were always getting like the better taste of the competition. Chess is a great example because it's like there's winners and there's losers, and you kind of take turns one move at a time. And even if you're in a winning position in chess, it only takes one bad move to lose the game. So
Exactly. And those moves can contradict each other. Sometimes you could think that you're moving forward and doing good in the game, and then next thing you know, some guy outsmarted you and put you in a bad position, and then you start to feel all these emotions of anger, jealousy, and resentment.
and then again, it's not just chess. I mean, it's competition in so many ways and forms. And sometimes it's, even competition against like a system. I mean, I played poker plenty of times. And the amount of times I've gotten upset over poker, felt like I was, fighting a war against some system that I couldn't see. And
I think everybody gets upset at poker. I don't
that's
think
fair.
I've never met a single person that sits down at a poker table and is excited to play poker for the winning potential.
I mean, yeah, I think, poker is probably not the best example, but, I think there's something to it though, in the sense that like emotions that are brought out through games, like, they have a kind of a tricky, slippery way of coming out of control, and a lot of the times leading us to do things or say things that we wish we didn't say. I mean, I have a hole in my desk upstairs in my room that came from Valorant, actually, if you know the game Valorant.
Gamer rage?
Yeah, gamer rage. I remember
Wow.
I used to have like such a big like gamer ego, and for me it was just because I felt like, it was an opportunity to compete, but also just like, it's different from like a sport. You're not running around on like a field, there's nothing really too physically demanding about it, but it's more of like the mental edge that
Right.
drives me to be competitive when it comes to video games. But I remember I was playing Valorant, and Valorant is a really humbling game. That's what I mean, is like whenever you get an ego, the universe has a way of just, showing you that you're not shit.
It's kind of like when Fortnite first came out. If you were able to build like super crazy fast and edit, you were the best in the game. Valorant's, I mean, more of a skilled game. It takes a lot of precise moves and strategy with your teammates to win, but ultimately, kind of, games do get the best of us.
When people fall off too, you're not always going to be in your prime. You're not always going to be able to perform to the best of your ability. I mean, you brought up Fortnite, but I remember for a while, like, I thought Ninja was like the best player in the world. You know what I mean? Like, I didn't know shit, to be fair, but like, I just thought like everybody talked about him, so he must, be the best. But then you realize there's like 13-year-olds, 12-year-olds who are just getting their PC or have been playing games for like the last 5 years, and they're cracked. Like,
Yeah.
you'll never beat those kids.
Oh, absolutely.
Video games, and especially when it comes to like youth, like a basketball, I look at LeBron James. He's old and he's still competing and he's still dominating. But like, it's like esports, especially, the younger you are, the more snappy your reflexes, your reaction time is. That's one competition that I don't see myself winning. So video games for me have been humbling, but it's also been an opportunity to kind of just understand and come to the life lesson that like you're never gonna be the best at something forever.
And that's fair. That's fair. Tell me about a time when you were like younger, more so in your primal years, that you felt kind of broken by the competition and you felt hopeless and like there wasn't any room to escape or grow.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely have felt that, and I feel like a lot of that kind of arises when you're competing in something that maybe you don't enjoy, or you don't know why you're competing in something, and you're just doing it for the sake of, maybe it's your parents, or maybe it's a rat race. I mean, jobs are kind of like a competition, right? But I think specifically talking back into my younger years and when I was in school, for me it was cross country.
Really?
Cross country was like one of those activities where like I kind of wanted to do it, but not really. And the more I did compete in cross country, the more I just kind of realized that like I didn't care, and it wasn't like fair that I didn't care. It left me feeling kind of broken and also kind of just useless and not really a part of the team. And some of it also stimulated just from who showed up to my competitions. Like, my mom was busy working a lot of the time, so she couldn't make it out to my track meets. And, I think as a kid, if you're doing something that you don't really want to do, and then, on top of that, your parents can't even make it out to support you, it's like, why would you still want to do that?
It's almost like try at something harder so that you can get the attention of those.
I feel like for me, it was just like, like my mom was like, got to do a sport. And I was like, okay, like, I guess I could do a sport. But, I always wanted it to be like, if I was going to do any support, I think like I just wanted people to be supportive of that. And,
Yeah.
like competition, once again, like that's the theme. Competition is great. I think there's a lot of positives that come from competing. And as a kid, like I wanted to compete. I think that's one of the like most raw but also like potential having emotions you can have as a kid is a drive for competition. And if you nurture that in a healthy way, you can really have someone who values hard work and values getting ahead, which is all great things. But I think the problem, especially when it comes to like youth, is a lot of the times it's like rather than, developing that sense of, self-worth and proudness and one's ability to work hard, it often comes with an ego. And
Yeah,
it's the ego that like taints the competition.
that's definitely the truth. Ego does taint the competition.
And in cross country, I mean, I really didn't have much of a drive to want to compete. So I didn't have an ego. And I feel like it was kind of just an opposite situation. Whereas, like, some people are, over competitive or, ultra competitive and they want to win no matter what. So, they develop an ego and they have this drive to succeed. But then you have some people who are on the other spectrum. And that's kind of how I was with cross country, where it's like I didn't really want to compete. I didn't really care, and I also just kind of felt like I wasn't a part of the team. So it drove me to seek out my own like benefits from participating in cross country, and I did. I was the guy who, while everybody else was running as hard as they could, trying to be first place, I just rallied the troops, man. Like, I didn't care if you were from another school. Like, I would grab anybody who felt like walking, taking a break, just jogging, bringing in the scenery, and we walk together. Because at the end of the day, like, that's still a valuable part of my experience was connecting with people, and not everybody wants to compete in something like cross country.
Would you say you learned the most when you connected with those people?
I think I learned that I'm not alone. Like, for every person who's out there who's doing something where they feel like they're doing it, whether it's for someone else or if they're unsure whether or not they would like doing it, I'd say like you're not alone. Just that kind of uncertainty about what you're doing. I felt like whenever I was competing in cross country and I would, gather the slower students, I got a sense that like these were people who were like me, who maybe, for whatever reason joined cross country just to get a taste of competition, to see if it would be the thing that drove them to be better, to bring out, the positives in them. And I feel like, the people that I kind of hang out with in cross country, we didn't really get a lot of positive from it. Like, we ran and then we were tired and we wanted to walk. And, there was kids who were like, I mean, kudos to them, right? The kids who were, were leading the pack, they always ran 5 miles, bare minimum for their warm ups. Like, they showed up to practice every time. Like, that's respectable. Like, I love watching people who genuinely love something compete and give it their all. I remember thinking to myself, like, that was my first taste of realizing that there's some people who just genuinely are not like that. You know what I mean? Like, or whatever they're competing in is not for them. You know what I mean? And cross country just wasn't for me.
And that's okay. Sometimes in life we think we know what we want, but then it's completely different. But that's what helps you grow, is trying different things. And doing the stuff you don't want really challenges your ego and makes you very humble, at least from my perspective.
From your perspective also, like, when you had this competition with like your friend and you guys were competing for kind of like views and internet clout, was there ever like a resolution, or did you guys kind of just fall out of touch and got stuck with like lingering emotions? Because that's definitely happened to me before, where I've competed with someone, maybe it got a little ugly, a little out of control, and rather than be able to talk about it and come to a resolution, we've kind of distanced, and you're both kind of just left with these, maybe not super present in the forefront of your mind all the time, but in the back of your head, you could be thinking like, man, I never resolved that.
I would say we never resolved any of that conflict, but I think it was stated that we understand where we were at the time. But that's probably one of the few things I regret, is just not resolving the conflict with those two. Because, at the end of the day, I did enjoy hanging out with them on Skype calls all day and just talking about YouTube or content creation. That's what brought me a lot of joy and peace at that time. That's the part I took for granted. But I think the hardest part was knocking up the courage and humility to apologize, because you never want, in that situation, you feel like you're right. You never feel like you're wrong. So having the humility to like say you're wrong when something happened, or that someone did something better, that's really tough.
Yeah.
There was kind of another time where that kind of energy continued into more competitions in my life. Like one of the most notable things I'd say I've done was I was a wrestler in high school, so that's already a pretty damn tough sport.
It's like very physically demanding, and there's so many people who want to be the best at that.
Yeah, and the people that are the best at it are the best at it. There's a huge gap in skill in that sport. So, I wrestled as a kid. I did decently well for Pee-wee wrestling. I mean, I guess the best you can as a child. But, when I got to high school, I had that same ego. When I hopped into that wrestling room, I'm like, oh, this shit's easy. It's going to be a cakewalk. Everybody probably sucks. I'm the man. Like, that ego got in the way. And it was really funny because we didn't even get halfway through, like, the actual, like, warm-up workout. And I started to feel like I was going to pass out because of how hard the conditioning was. And at that moment, I realized I'm like, wow, I've had a big ego for a long time that I haven't resolved. I just think I'm the best at everything, and I need to stop thinking that way and require more space to grow. So, that was the moment the script kind of flipped for me. I kind of realized not everything was easy. Even when going through hard stuff, there's always stuff that's going to be harder that you don't know of. And
It's like progression. I mean,
Yeah.
you go into the gym, you try to lift a little bit heavier than you lifted last week. But, the danger side of that is like, just like how, Icarus flew too close to the sun and lost his wings and came crashing down. If you're that person who, goes into the gym and they lift it a little bit heavier than last week, and then the next week they go in and they think, oh, I can lift a little bit heavier, but they push too hard. They add on a little bit too much weight, and next thing you know, you're dealing with an injury that has now set you back significantly. And, I guess in the example of the gym, like you're not competing against anybody. Like there's no competition in the gym. I mean, I guess if you're going to do like pro bodybuilding, that's like one thing, right? But even then, you should know to like push yourself in a way that's healthy. I mean,
Yeah.
you want competition to drive your growth in a healthy, controlled way. You don't want competition to lead you to do things that are dangerous or potentially going to set you back. And I mean, like ego lifting is like, it's called ego lifting for a reason.
It's literally called ego lifting for a reason.
Yeah, yeah. And I mean, I've seen the videos, man. Like, ooh, man. I think about it and I'm like, ooh, I get tingles down my back thinking back on some of these videos I've seen. And what I mean, I also think back onto just how like every, like once again, form of competition, whether you're competing against another person or yourself, has that kind of like super quick instant, like universal, like you were feeling hot and now you're not, what
Yeah.
I mean? Like same thing with like gambling. I feel like gambling is like a competition
Oh, for
with
sure.
yourself. You know what I mean? It's like, are you going to stop before you lose it all? And a lot of people, they can't control it because once again, these kind of competitions, they bring out, emotions in us that run wild and kind of get out of control.
Absolutely. Speaking of the gym, it's crazy to think that, and I understand, it's crazy to think that there are people out there that want to be super, super big and will risk every aspect of their health to do so. Like the other day, I was scrolling through Instagram and I saw a video of this really big bodybuilder. His bicep was probably like the size of my head.
Like
And-
squeeze your head.
Yeah. He could probably crush me just by flexing. But he was wearing a CPAP machine while he was working out. And, that got me thinking. I'm like, your ego has to be so big to think like, okay, maybe it's time to stop putting myself through this because I can't even actively breathe without the help of external factors. So
That's crazy. I mean, it's like, yeah, if you're getting pushed to the point where you're literally, throwing away your health for something, maybe, you're accidentally, confusing discipline and like hard work for ego. You know
Yeah.
what I mean? That's the thing, is like ego is one of those kind of complex emotions where it's kind of not always easy to spot if it's secretly like controlling you or leading you to do things. And, you gave the example of the bodybuilder who's on CPAP. It's like, does he need to do that? Like, no, he doesn't. If he was just happy with, how he looked, and he thought he looked the best, that would be enough. But I understand too, like some of these guys, like they're gonna go on to try to do professional bodybuilder shows, and they truly do have it like twisted in their mind where they feel like the only way they can have an edge in the competition is by putting themselves through, crazy trials and subjecting their body to terrible drugs. But that's what I'm saying. It's all up to individual's choice. Competition has led people down some dark paths, but I think it also, brings out good in people. It just really comes down to like you and how far are you going to let the consequences of your ego drive you? You know what I mean? Are you willing to lose your humanity? Are you willing to give up your friendships, your relationships? And these are things that often can't be undone. Like I had a friend who I knew, and he was really into weightlifting, and even to the point where like, he'd do steroids, and steroids can change like how you feel, how you like, emotionally regulate yourself. And, it allowed him to get bigger, get stronger. He increased in his strength, but ultimately he lost, connections to people that he really valued. And he felt like it was because while he was taking this gear, while he was on these substances, he just couldn't keep his emotions in check. And it led him to say things and do things that were hurtful to people. And, it's like his ego to want to get stronger, his drive in his mind, this discipline to want to get stronger was really kind of, what he ultimately reflected to be his ego masked as strength.
It's kind of funny too, in the sense of the symbolism with bodybuilding is the goal is to get bigger and stronger. But when you think about it, having a whole bunch of beauty muscles isn't equivalent to strength. And I'm not trying to generalize, but there are a lot of people in the bodybuilding industry who tend to be insecure, have some mental health issues, and that's okay. But it's treating it the wrong way is what gets you in trouble. It's kind of like the same people who, they drink and smoke to numb their feelings or move past something because they're not happy with the way their life is, or they can't move on from something. They could be too proud to admit like, hey, I need to work on myself and I need to work towards something greater rather than subject myself to this life that I've been putting myself through.
It's also just opening your eyes up, and if you are feeling like you're competing with someone, or there's someone who you genuinely maybe are a little jealous, envious of, you see, what they're doing with their life, maybe instead of, digging and doubling down on those negative emotions, try to take some time to reflect on like, why you feel like this person is more successful than you, or why do you feel like you're competing with this person? Maybe you're not actually competing with them. Maybe, if you reflect on that or even approach them in a way that's like with humility, they'd be willing to like share.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Because I think part of this, goal in life is to accumulate knowledge, but then also pass it on to other people, which is why I feel so passionate about, sharing my story, because, I feel like I'm very proud that I was able to survive and overcome foster care. And, maybe I have a little bit of an ego about it, but ultimately, I do believe that like I made mistakes, I stumbled along the way. And the goal is to take the things that I've learned from those trials and tribulations and to be able to pass it on to someone. And it doesn't matter, who you are, what you look like, your gender, this or that. If you're struggling, if you, are hearing what I'm saying and it's connecting with you on an emotional level, and this was for you. You were meant to hear this.
Amen to that.
Amen to that. Well, I want to get in a little bit about, resentment, because I feel like resentment is a pretty ugly emotion that can kind of a lot of the times be the culmination of, unchecked ego. Maybe it's been, tempering for a while. It's been boiling. And then, this is ultimately the conclusion, you're left with resentment. So I just want to, I guess, ask you straight up, do you feel like you have any lingering resentment for, anyone or anything from competition, or that stemmed from some emotion from competition?
I think because I never learned how to properly communicate with most people since I was kind of an outcast when I was a kid, and I fought for approval from everybody. And that's kind of why I wanted to be the best in competition, was to get some of that attention generated towards me, because I didn't have too many friends growing up and I was always kind of felt outcasted. But I think like the biggest person I resent is myself still. I resent like my behavior from the past, and like just how egotistical I was at points and not realizing the bigger picture. I mean, it's great that I learned now that that probably was just a lot of unmet emotions underneath it. But, you know, that can't undo a lot of the decisions I made and a lot of the words I said to some people.
I feel that, man. It's something I think about a lot as well, just because as a foster kid, I was kind of crazy. I was that kid who was, flipping the desk and kicking the door open in school. And, I feel a lot of negativity towards, the actions and things that the past me said as well. But part of that, is letting go, and also, like you said, accepting the fact that you have grown from that and that's not you anymore. And I hope that you're able to like let go of some of your self resentment, because that's a hard thing to carry. But it's also, I understand, one of the hardest things to let go of sometimes is resentment for oneself, because we're our own biggest critics. And I feel like if anybody is gonna hold you kind of like accountable or hold you in check, for a lot of people it's themselves.
Absolutely. I would also like to add to that, I tend to resent most people too, because I see the potential in a lot of different individuals, and sometimes with their decision making, they tend to put themselves backwards and put themselves in some bad situations. And I'll be honest, I don't have any hate in my heart for anybody. Genuinely, I like everybody. There's not a single person on this earth that I could confidently say I cannot stand or don't want to be around, because I like people regardless of what their background looks like or what mistakes they've made. I don't have room to hate anybody or dislike them. I could prefer to not be around them, but it's easier to accept somebody for who they are and avoid the bad people. But, I tend to resent people who tend to make the same mistakes over and over and blame it on other people when it's their doing. When they have the potential to do good for themselves and choose to constantly do bad, I resent that, because, I was once in a situation similar, and it's kind of a mirror. It's a reflection of myself. And I'm like, you got a big lesson waiting for you at the end of the tunnel. And it would be a lot easier if you did yourself a favor and looked inwards. So, what's kind of helped me overcome a lot of my resentment is just as simple as it sounds, accepting circumstances for the way they are, knowing that you can't change the past, but you can always move forward into the future and make something sustainable for yourself. And those people who you do resent, you can always forgive them, but choose not to be around them if they wronged you.
Yeah, forgiveness for yourself, forgiveness for others is one of the most important things that you can, and you can do, because it's, if you don't learn how to let go of resentment, I often feel like something a lot darker, you know, cooks in within you, and eventually it leads you down maybe a path to do actions that you didn't want to do. I remember, like, a little bit of a story, but there was a time where I was kind of like in a crossroads. I had a really big emotional breakout, and I had kind of just lost my shit. You know what I mean? Like, I was so sad of just trying to like deal with the stuff that I was feeling on the inside, and a lot of leftover emotions from, going through the foster system that I just kind of was crashing out. But I remember during this crash out, like even then I had to find it within me to like put a pause on the crash out, realize that like in front of me are really two choices. One of the choices leads me down a path of forgiveness and rehabilitation and rebuilding the love, because a little bit of context, like I was crashing out and I was also kind of taking it out on my mom, which she didn't deserve at the time. So I look back on that and I resent myself for how I treated my mother, but I also know that we made it right, that she's forgiven me, and that it's okay for me to want to move forward and forgive myself and just remind myself that I can do better.
And it's understandable in your situation at that point. Like, there's a lot of stuff that when you're younger, you don't understand, that when you get older, you understand very well. And there are a lot of things that happen to people when they're a kid that they'll never understand. And they will choose to place the blame on someone else. So it's incredibly rare to actually understand like what situation you were in and to forgive yourself and hope for forgiveness from others.
And most importantly, it takes time, right? Like this journey of life that I've been on thus far is, I'm 25. It's 25 years, of living, of having to just go through stuff to genuinely come to a conclusion about, why I went through the things that I went through and what that means for me, going forward. It takes a lot of time to unpack that. And I just want anybody who is listening, who's dealing with something, who, is going through a hard time, to know that like you're not alone. There's someone out there who's going through something that you've gone through, and there's time. Time is one of the biggest things that changes things. You know what I mean? Nothing stays the same forever. So even if you're in a bad situation, I just want you to know that there's hope, and that if you hold out in time, things will change.
Absolutely. Just keep growing, guys. Do what you got to do. Look inwards and accept what you've done.
You won't grow. You won't grow if you don't take the time. You have to take time to grow emotionally and to mature. And when you look back on things, like you'll see the negatives, but you'll also be able to see the positives.
Drop the ego and show some humility, and there's a lot that can happen just with those two things. But I guess that's looking about time.
Yeah, we're coming up on the end of the episode. I think we touched on really the theme, and the biggest takeaways is not letting these emotions that come out in competition control you, being emotionally stoic sometimes, and a little bit of calculated on how you approach reactions to things is important. And hopefully you guys walk away after this episode feeling a little bit more prepared to tackle the uncertainty in life, to go through those trials, but feel, comfortable in the uncomfortable, to feel like proud, but not feel controlled by your ego, to not, feel controlled by your emotions. It's really the goal. It's hard. You're going to make mistakes, but you can do it.
Absolutely. Well, if you guys want to know, we are currently working on episode 1 and 2. Production-wise, it's definitely a slower process because we're still getting to know each other on a professional level and just on a personal level. Like, we've been trying to hang out once a week just to chill. And
we also both have, full lives that we're doing.
Yeah.
We're taking care of our own lives, but, it's about finding the time to make it happen. And I'm happy to be here. So
Amen.
I look forward to episode 3 and episode 4 and 5 and season 2 and season 3. And eventually, after this first season, we kind of discussed that we really want to use this first season as an opportunity to share more about ourselves with you guys, but also share how we've gotten to know each other. And, then eventually we'll get to talk about all the craziness that's going on in the world.
Absolutely. Well, guys, thank you for watching or listening to this episode of the NF3 Podcast. I'm Hunter, and this is Sean. And we will see you guys in episode 3.
Bye. Catch you guys in the next one.
Oh, that's real good.